How's it going, guys? Before I do proceed into this commentary regarding the PlayStation exclusives that are still going to be be coming out on PlayStation 4, now this is meaning that before I do proceed, I wanted to talk about really quickly about Cyberpunk 2077, that it will be presented at the E3 2019 with the new gameplay. Now, as well, it will be playable, but it will not be playable by any of us, because the developers are the ones that are going to be playing the game, and we're going to be watching. Basically, it's exactly similar thing will be happening as it did in the 2018 version of the E3, and obviously, I hope it's going to be public this time around, not like it was private. Now, I understand why it was private, because, you know, there's a lot of subjects to change elements in the game, even though CD Projekt Red even mentioned themselves that there has been already quite a few changes that was made, and so you would not be you should just keep your expectations low. You know, they do that on purpose, even though Cyberpunk is hyped through the roof for real. One other thing as well is regarding the new Frostbite engine that EA is developing that makes it looks like a more realistic hair. I'm not too sure if I can show it in here in the gameplay. I'm not gonna risk it. So the hair presentation and how it looks fantastic. I'm not gonna deny anything like that. And we already know that Frostbite engine is a lot of difficulties of trying to develop something or an in-game process anyway, and you know, it's a giant pain in the ass. And of course there's a lot more to it. There's more realism to the facial expressions and how the skin tone and how the muscle work, individual muscle inside the face's sculpture, and how everything moves simultaneously, because there are some limitations that you would be expecting from this gen consoles. Now the next gen consoles, because there's so much more graphical upgrades and technological leap that there will be on the PlayStation 5 that we already pretty much know, and of course I do not expect anything less on the next Xbox. And so now the main topic of this commentary I wanted to talk about this video, right, is regarding that during the Sony's Investor Relations Day 2019 presentation, President and the CEO of the Sony Interactive Entertainment, Jim Ryan, spoke over the slide, including a key art for The Last of Us Part 2, Death Stranding, and Ghost of Tsushima that focus on a critical role of the PlayStation 4 over the next few years. Now they have mentioned this is their quote: "For the next 3 years or so, PlayStation 4 will be the engine of the CIE's engagement and probability that as we seek to keep the existing owner base engaged and delighted and attract new owners from different markets and different demographics," said Ryan, speaking over the slide. "In this, we will be massively helped by the outstanding roster of new and exclusive games that has yet to be launched." Basically, you know, in inclusion of these games is the PS4 centric slide confirms that they are still planning for the current generation, though these comments don't rule out the possibility of them also appearing on PlayStation 5. Regardless of they receive official cross-generation release, the PlayStation 5 is confirmed to include the PlayStation 4 backwards compatibility, meaning that these PlayStation 4 games will be playable on the PS5 in one form or another. The Death Stranding, The Last of Us Part 2, and the Ghost of Tsushima, they're all will be happening on a PlayStation 3. This does not rule out the possibility of them coming out on a PlayStation 5 as well, and on top of that, the backwards compatibility, as I mentioned. Now, there are going to be some kind of limitations because of the PlayStation 4, but also those exclusive games will be happening on PlayStation 5. It does not matter. Like, let's say this, right? The Last of Us comes out in 2019, 2020, for example, before the PlayStation 5 releases. Let's just say that, and then a couple. Let's just go and say PlayStation 5 comes out in the end of 2020, and we can predict and say, like, for example, Ghost of Tsushima will come out in November, right? And it will be obviously cross-plat, so you can play on PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5. And then let's say Death Stranding will be coming out 2021, for example, and that game will be also on the PlayStation 5 and on the PlayStation 4. So, you know, there is no limitations of how it goes, because as you might already remember, the last generation, PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4, how they did it, basically. Remember, when the game comes out on the PlayStation 4, it also has some kind of downgrade, unfortunately, though, on the PlayStation 3, because it did come out. Sony was anyway supporting the PlayStation 3 for the next 3 years since the PlayStation 4 came out. After that, they completely abandoned it. And now, you know, after when they abandoned it, they were concentrating all their resources and power mainly only for the PlayStation 4. Now, I believe it will be a similar story in this case again for the PlayStation 5. I personally think that they will be supporting PlayStation 4 for the next 3 years after when PlayStation 5 comes out. And so obviously all the games that you are expecting, they're all going to be available on the PlayStation 4 as well. I'm sure they don't want to abandon PlayStation 4 like I presume that they did PlayStation 3, maybe even extend the years, perhaps maybe 4 to 5 years. Personally, I do not want them to do that. I want them to go with 3, maybe even 2, because let me tell you why. Now, this might be in minor votes in this case, and thoughts on this case. Basically, it's just that I wanted the developers to be concentrating mostly and anywhere as much as possible on the next gen. And that's most likely because, you know, the graphical leap that they have to do. And that's awesome because, you know, you want to have your games to look the best, and of course frame rates for me is everything. And of course, and the other thing is, you know, if quicker you abandon the PlayStation 4, I mean, this is not good. It's not an ideal choice. Obviously, it's not, right? Because there's so many people, almost 100 million people or something? I'm not too sure. Basically, that many people purchased the PlayStation 4s, you know, they're not going to abandon it as easily as that. So, at this point, I don't see them abandoning it anytime soon. I'll say another 3 years. That's my estimated thoughts on how long they will be, I should say, keep developing games on the PlayStation 4, even though PlayStation 5 has already been released, let's say that. So there will be that kind of lifespan that they will be supporting the PlayStation 4, and then a couple of more years later, I'll say a decade later, that's when I think they will stop their manufacturing for the PlayStation 4 itself, even PlayStation 4 Pro, perhaps even longer than that. Now then, obviously PlayStation 5 will be their next gen game, so to say. I also heard some rumors, I'm not too sure if it's a rumor, but I'm sure it's not a confirmation, that they were talking about that PlayStation 5 will be the Sony's very last console, and that's it. After that, there will be no more. I don't believe that. This is just simply not profitable for Sony to do. I personally don't think Sony will do that. I think that Sony will actually continue manufacturing PlayStation 5, 6, 7, whatever, and continue on every, so to say, 6 to 7 years. I personally think so. It's just simply is very profitable. If people keep buying these consoles, these PlayStation consoles, why would they ever stop? You know, it makes no sense. And now when there is, like, for example, people were already saying like, oh, thank God, PlayStation 5 is not coming out in 2019. It's a confirmation, mind you guys, as well. You will not even see PlayStation 5 before summer of 2020. That's a confirmed fact. I want you to understand this. This is confirmed. Now, anyway, so continue on as well, talking about it, like people were, as I mentioned, people did not want to see PlayStation 5 in 2019 because PlayStation 4 is in its highest peak as it can be at this moment. I don't see it being any higher than it is because right now the sales are going down for it. That does not mean that the sales are gradually increasing. Obviously, you know, numbers do go up. The numbers go down over the time, but how quickly they go up. Does that make sense? But hopefully you understood that part. And I'm sure, like, you know, PlayStation will do anything they can to support the PlayStation 4 era, and even though when the PlayStation 5 does come out. And so, you know, people will be already, you know, making leaps, making jumping ships, so to say. If I want to, it's not really a dying ship, so to say. It's not sinking, you know, like they're going to a better, newer, different ship, if that makes any sense again. Now, still, we have to wait and see, of course, how it will all turn out to be. Now, regarding back into the track of these 3 exclusive games, yes, I do definitely believe so, that they are going to be, how can I say, they are going to be on the PlayStation 4, and I do believe they are going to be all on the PlayStation 5 as well. Even though The Last of Us Part 2, I don't think it will be coming out when the PlayStation 5 comes out. I think it will come out earlier, and so I think that they will have some kind of remaster like they did for the Last of Us, or maybe they will do something like how can I say, maybe they will do some kind of backwards compatibility, or you pay a little extra money and that's how you can transfer your game over to the next you know, console, so to say. And so there will be a giant leap on that, and I mean that would be epic because it seems like the transition is going to be soft. It's not going to be as brutal as the PlayStation 3 or the PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 4, sorry, that it was. Remember, you couldn't even bloody put in the PlayStation 3 CD the disc itself into the PlayStation 4, it would just simply not run. But then if you buy from the store on the PlayStation 3, you pay $5 or $10, I don't remember exactly, extra, then you can pretty much transfer it over to the next gen, the PlayStation 4 anyway, that time. And so there will be something similar to this, but they also mentioned that the architecture is obviously going to be very similar to the PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5, and so obviously it makes it easier for you to be playing PlayStation 4 games on the PlayStation 5. Now, one last thing I wanted to mention before I do end this commentary. It's regarding that people were very shocked and surprised to see how well it does with the SSD RAM and how much more SSD drive, that's what I meant to say. And anyway, so solid state drive, and then there's also basically an improvements in the technological leap for the PlayStation 5, and everyone was shocked, saying that the loading screens were incredible because Mark Cerny, he has even showcased, and there's even a video of that. I don't think I can actually show it again, but there was a actual video showing on the PlayStation 4 Pro that it takes 15 seconds to load. On the PlayStation 5 it takes 0.8 seconds to load, and when you do like a fast travel, so to say, right? Okay, that's fine, that's understandable, but then they show also this, when you traverse through the world very, very quickly, not a lot of stuff can load up as quickly as possible because you have a hard drive. Hard drives are slower than the solid state drives. And so, with this, they showed how major difference they could be, but we have to understand, the Spider-Man game was developed specifically for the PlayStation 4. This is not developed for a PlayStation 5. When you do that, for example, you show like you buy a better upgraded graphics cards, obviously it's gonna look better because not a lot more stuff has been implemented for your next gen consoles. Because the game is inferior compared to what PlayStation 5 is, that it can't support. Obviously, everything else is going to be a giant leap and a step up. I guarantee you this one thing. When the next Spider-Man does come out, I believe it will come out next Spider-Man. It's a giant profit for Insomniac. I'm sure they're going to make a sequel to it. And when it comes out on PlayStation 5, it's going to have somewhat of a similar loading screens. Loading screens. What the fuck? Yeah, loading screens. Why? Why do I still think it's going to be a long loading screen, even though there is going to be a solid state drive? Because the game is going to be simply outstanding on the visual part. It's simply going to be extremely outstanding. It's going to be up to 100 to 200 times more visually like spectacle, so to say, from the PlayStation 4 to a giant leap to the PlayStation 5. Even though we already know the solid state drive will be making an appearance, loading screens are definitely going to be improvement compared to the PlayStation 4. It does not mean that it will take, it's going to be a much more heavier task for the games to run, because the developers are going to be putting a lot of time and effort to improve the visualizations up to 4K native resolutions, 60 FPS, for example, more shit going on the screen. For example, when you traverse through the world, you can see these objects laying around. Every single thing is physically can be knocked over. Like, you have any idea how demanding all of this can be? And especially if they are all operating in real time with the light tracings like PlayStation 5, and also the 8K possibility that the future-proofing this console. No way that this console was going to be like having these loading screens like up to 1 second. I just don't believe that. Now, I do believe, because they, what they showed us as a PlayStation can run, I should say, loading screens on Spider-Man game on PlayStation 5 to be more specifically so fast. Well, as I mentioned, it's simply inferior to what the PlayStation 5 is. The PlayStation 4 is that inferior, because the PlayStation 4 Pro is, it's in the aspect of the 2012 maybe, specs that it has, 2011 maybe, obviously it's not going to be a high tier of a console, it's more of a mid tier, so to say, the specs that it has. PlayStation 4, that's included, PlayStation 4 Pro, sorry, and I say that will be more like 2012 specs that it supports, and has like that mid tier, not the high tier, because if it will be high tier, it will be much more expensive that it would turn out to be. And so obviously PlayStation 5 is more or less, everyone predicts, is going to be $500, but because of such a fantastic stuff that Sony is making it out to be, that the solid state drive is going to be the fastest drive that is currently in the market. So it's a big, you know, it's a big word. These are big words to say from Mark Cerny and Sony, and you know, they need to live up to that expectations. Light tracing, 8K capabilities. What the fuck? We can't even get the native 4K, even on Xbox One X. It's insane. Like you need to concentrate mostly on 4K 60 FPS. That's all that matters personally for me. I care about the 60 FPS. If the 4K is not compatible, let's say 4K is not native, or it can't reach to 4K, let it go to, let's say, 1440. Now, P quality, I'm good with that. As long as I can get 60 FPS or higher, I'm good with that. As long as the game plays like crispy smooth and feels good. Oh, please, that would be epic. You know, Rockstar Games, for example, 60 FPS on Grand Theft Auto. Holy shit, please give me that. Like, that would be amazing. I don't want to play 30 FPS anymore, those games. And with this graphical leap as well that they have, there will be no excuse of saying we can't reach to the 60 FPS, because the graphical improvements that it has is insane. But you are concentrating all your time into visualization, so obviously the frame rate is not going to support that. Tune it down a little bit. God of War does it, well, even though it's not exactly 60 FPS, but still, God of War does it, but I do understand it's not an open world game. Oh, sorry, Rage 2, how about that? Rage 2, Rage 2 does up to 60, well, it's not exactly 60, there are some, you know, these frame rates that could be a little bit, but still, it's on open world games. Wouldn't that count still? I don't know. They need to make some kind of compromises that people would not be able to see, and at least achieve more than 1080p quality. But as long as it's 60 FPS or higher, I'm good. That would be absolutely fantastic, and that needs to be the standard. That's the most important thing. 60 FPS is the standard. No lower than 60 FPS. That's it. I'm sure PlayStation 5 can support that with the specs that we already heard that it can support. That's insane anyway. Alright, well, I think I'm done rambling. Holy shit, I did not mean to do this video this long. I'm so sorry, guys. If you're still watching it, I do really do appreciate you sticking around here and listening to me ramble as well a little bit. Yeah, it's not really ranting I've mentioned. I've just, you know, put a lot of my opinion in here. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Have a good one.